is arguably the foundation of all real wealth, as there is no life without it. Now, humans live for hundreds of thousands of years without money. We expire within minutes without air. The distinction between financial and natural capital brings to mind a chance encounter I had many years ago in Malaysia with Malaysia's Minister of Forests. He explained to me that because the interest on money deposited in a bank grows faster than trees, Malaysia and its people would be best served by cutting all their trees, selling the timber, and putting the proceeds in a bank to earn interest. And as he spoke, the image flashed into my mind of a lifeless Malaysian desert populated only by banks, their computers silently calculating interest on the money from the sale of Malaysia's trees. The false assumption that converting natural capital into money creates wealth leads naturally to another false assumption, namely that making money creates wealth and the public good is thereby maximized to the extent that we each seek to maximize our personal financial gain without regard to social or environmental consequences. As many of you know, the economics profession actually gave Milton Friedman a Nobel Prize for a book in which he took this false assumption to its absurd extreme by arguing that for a business person to sacrifice personal gain for some supposed higher good is immoral. So what are we to make of a profession that awards its highest honor for a work promoting the moral philosophy of the psychopath? It took me many years to realize that returns to money are in fact returns to people who have money, which means the decisions based on maximizing returns to money lead to an ever greater concentration of financial power and all the many pathologies associated with that inequality. It is simple logic. An economic system designed to maximize individual financial gains without regard to the consequences for human, social, and natural capital will actually deplete real wealth and grow inequality at an accelerating rate until the system collapses. The illusion that money is wealth has conditioned us to believe that economic growth creates wealth. Economic growth, at least as we now experience it, is of course actually destroying real wealth. Our choice is to measure economic performance by the rate at which we are converting natural capital to financial capital is an act of collective suicide and is therefore a public health issue of the first order. Now, this conclusion is supported by more than 60 years of evidence produced by the failure of the most audacious and destructive social engineering experiment in human history. The failed experiment is the product of an economic ideology you know in Australia by the name economic rationalism. Others in the world know it as neoliberalism or market fundamentalism. Someone once referred to it as a mental disease, and I think she had a point. Destroying real wealth to make money for people who already have more than they need is an act of collective insanity. We can and must make human and environmental health the measure of our economic performance and create economies that minimize the resource cost of that performance. Now here's one you got to listen closely to. We've been converting real capital into financial capital. And we now have huge amounts of financial capital concentrated in the hands of the very wealthy, playing out through private equity firms, hedge funds, and so forth. We need to reverse the whole economic process so we begin to take that financial capital and convert it back into human, social, and natural capital. Not for financial return, but for returns in real wealth, real capital. And we must assure that the benefits of that real wealth are equitably and justly distributed to the end of optimizing the health and well-being of every person and every living being. Now, it would be reasonable to conclude that such a radical reorientation of priorities is politically impossible. When somebody says this isn't politically feasible, my answer is, well, by that logic, human survival is not politically feasible. Our task is to make it politically feasible. And that task is eased by the fact that the necessary changes are not only essential to our collective survival, they are also essential to bring forth the world of our shared human dream. As we confront this reality, and for the reality of the need to create healthier societies that actually nurture the healthful, mature development of our brain, we have much to learn from societies that evolve more healthful cultural patterns, including many of the indigenous tribal cultures we once dismissed as primitive and attempted to disrupt and wipe from our collective human memory. Prior to the disruptions of empire, the customs and ceremonies of these societies generally supported the equitable sharing of resources, whatever resources were available. They nurtured strong bonds of mutual caring, service, and accountability. They honored and cared for their Earth Mother as the source of life. Their children had many caretakers and adult role models. They experienced life in community settings that had none of the segmentation and fragmentation characteristics of modern life. It does indeed take a village to nurture the balanced development of our children into emotionally and morally mature adults. And I just want to note here, I had the opportunity of a fascinating discussion last night with Dennis Foley, who will be on this panel, about Australia's indigenous peoples and their knowledge and their experience. And I was just stunned by the extent to which you have this extraordinary experience here in Australia that we of the modern industrial society need to connect with and integrate into our own understanding and experience as part of navigating this great turning. And what an amazing resource and a possibility here in Australia to aggressively engage and meld that indigenous Aboriginal knowledge with your modern scientific knowledge to evolve a whole new human civilization and to be in the lead in that work. The inequality common to more modern societies disrupts the bonds of community and leads to social segmentation by class, gender, race, language, religion, all of the other divisions of humanity. Add to that our dependence on money, which dehumanizes and commodifies our relationships with one another. Then add the automobile to fragment lives geographically by separating home, work, shopping, school, church, and recreation, and you have a typical modern life experience ideally suited to suppressing the development of our empathic mammalian brain and developing very smart reptiles. As inequality grows and the bonds of community are stressed to the limits of tolerance, the very desire to bond and serve is displaced by the primitive competitive drives of the reptilian brain for survival, territory, status, and dominance. The related destruction of mental and physical health is augmented by depriving those at the bottom of the most basic essentials of good physical health, including clean water and nutritious food. Change begins with new cultural stories that celebrate the best rather than the worst of what we are and what we can be. Substitute with new indicators that assess economic performance in relation to what we can be and what we truly want. The New Economics Foundation in London has created the most promising index of true economic performance I've yet seen. They call it the Happy Planet Index. The numerator is a composite of two indicators: life expectancy, which is a simple objective measure of physical health, and life satisfaction or happiness, which is a subjective proxy for mental health. The denominator is the ecological footprint, an indicator of the per capita environmental burden required to achieve this level of physical and mental health. The Living Planet Index thus shows the ecological efficiency with which a society is delivering human well-being. The results demonstrate that it is possible to live long, happy lives with a relatively small environmental impact. Generally, the island nations and countries with the highest levels of civic participation score the highest. Australia's Pacific neighbor, the archipelago of Vanuatu, scored highest, followed by Colombia, Costa Rica, and the Caribbean island of Dominica. The Western industrial nations generally did poorly. Australia ranked 139, the United States 150, Russia 172, very near to the African nation of Zimbabwe, which was last at 178. Now, the idea that human society should seek human happiness as their measure of performance goes back at